Chris Stevens.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There is, of course, nothing to celebrate here. The Conservative Government are trying to clean up a mess that they've created and are not even getting the job done properly. Now, we have repeatedly called on the Government to scrap the benefit freeze, and this uprating is, of course, welcome, but it does appear to be too little, too late. The brutal cuts imposed by the Government have and will continue to entrench poverty across these islands. A 1.7% increase in working age benefits does not make up for the damage caused by the 4-year freeze, and if austerity was really over, this Government would be making up the shortfall. So let's look at some of the effects. Overall, benefits and tax credits affected by the 4-year freeze will be around 6% lower in 2020-21 than if the Consumer Price indexation had been applied during the 4 years of the freeze. And taking account of all uprating restrictions across a decade, affected DWP benefits are around 9% lower in 2020-21 than if the Consumer Price Index had applied since 2010. Child benefit and working tax credit elements are between 13% and 17% lower in 2021 than would have been the case if the Consumer Price Index had applied throughout the decade. And as the Resolution Foundation estimated that the 4-year freeze saved the Government £4.7 billion a year by 2019-20, of which £1.8 billion was attributable to the final year of the freeze. And yet the Treasury had forecast at the 2016 budget that the 4-year freeze would achieve an annual saving of £3.5 billion by 2019-20. And just last week, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation reported that the benefit freeze has seen the value of many benefits fall. The same benefit received in 2019 and 2013 is worth around 6% less. And you really got to wonder if austerity was really over, as we keep getting told, and has continually been suggested, then the Government would make up the shortfall. There are, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sad to say, 1 million people living in poverty in Scotland, and almost 1 in 4 of them are children. In 2019, 250,000 children living in one of the world's richest nations are growing up in poverty. This is nothing short of scandalous. Poverty is not inevitable. People not having enough money to feed and clothe their children is not something that happens by accident. The existence of poverty in a country as rich as ours is a direct consequence of political choices. The decade of austerity was a political choice. Massive long-term cuts to the social security budget were a political choice. The widening of the holes in the social security safety net so that more families and children would fall through is, of course, a political choice. The ill-conceived and hopelessly financed introduction of universal credit is a political choice. Making the poorest, weakest and most vulnerable in our society carry the can and bear the brunt of a financial crisis that had nothing to do with them is, of course, a political choice. And there could be no doubt at all that one of the main drivers of child poverty in these islands has been the Government's package of welfare reforms, which by any measure has been an abject failure. How else could one describe a package of reforms whose result is that 65% of all children who live in poverty come from households where at least one adult is working? And there's no need to take my word for it, Madam Deputy Speaker. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty said changes to benefits and sanctions against parents are driving the increase in child poverty. Some would still have us believe that it will take decades to turn things around and lift children out of poverty, but I do not believe that is true. There are measures that the UK Government could take right now that would immediately stop children and their families falling into poverty, and one of those would be to immediately stop the rollout of universal credit, take their time, find the money to fix the major problems in the system, which they are only too well aware of, but the Government choose to ignore. There is no doubt that poverty in childhood and how it leads to poverty of hope, aspiration and opportunity. Most movingly, we hear of too many times the deep scars that people have in adulthood as a result of being in child poverty, and I give way to my good friend.
On that point, I wondered what the honourable member thought of the Citizens Advice Bureau proposal that all frozen benefits be uprated not just by CPI but CPI plus 2% for the next 4 years, which will go some way to address the appalling imbalance and poverty that so many of our children and, as I say, our disabled people have found themselves in.
Friend for that intervention. She is, of course, right. Citizens Advice have produced an excellent report on this, and she'll know, as well as I do, my local Citizens Advice bear the brunt of trying to help people fill out the forms and having to navigate their way through the social security system. And I hope the government take cognizance of the Citizens Advice report to which she refers. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is an inescapable and undeniable link between the paucity of affordable rented property in the private rented sector, as we've heard from the shadow front bench, and the increased risk of people becoming homeless simply because they cannot afford to meet the cost of living in private rented accommodation. And there is a chasm of difference between what people are expected to pay and what they can afford to pay. However, let us be absolutely clear, this housing crisis, particularly in England, as well as the rising levels of homelessness and rough sleeping, did not happen by accident. There has not been some unforeseen set of circumstances that have led to the number of households living in temporary accommodation in England rising by 60% between 2012 and 2018. There has been no unexpected or unforeseen quirk that has led to the number of rough sleepers in England nearly doubling over the last 5 years. This housing crisis was all too predictable, because just about every stakeholder warned this government right from the start about the inevitable consequences of pursuing their austerity agenda. When they froze local housing allowance and failed to meet their targets for building social housing, what did they expect to happen other than a rise in homelessness and the number of people sleeping rough on our streets? Because that is exactly what has happened. So let's call this what it is, a crisis entirely of the government's own making. It is incontestable that the government's austerity agenda has had a hugely negative impact on people's ability to rent private sector accommodation. And research from the Chartered Institute of Housing shows that many local LHA rates now fail to cover even the cheapest third of rents as they were designed to. And a survey carried out with the National Housing Federation and the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations found that tenants on universal credit were more than twice as likely to be in debt than other tenants. There is much more to be done, Madam Deputy Speaker, to ensure that we help our fellow citizens escape poverty. And I hope the ministers today will have seen the 2 bills that I have presented today, one of which is to ensure that those on zero-hour contracts who give up a zero-hour contract job are not subjected to sanctions under universal credit, and that they take cognizance of the fact that I presented a bill today which ensures that those in rent arrears, that the government should step in and ensure that anyone in those rent arrears is not evicted from their home. Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you.